Today we, after some setbacks, where the frailty of the body and overexhaustion can take a toll on the schedule that we had. So today we resume week 38 of the Sutta exploration series. And today's is a special sutta because it touches upon what makes kamma, what we often hear about, the role of intention, or sometimes referred to as volition, cetana. So every principle that we have within the Dhamma, in the doctrine, we're so lucky because every single one of these principles has at least several references, exhortations, expositions, classification within the suttas. So we don't have to feel like we are groping in the dark, or it's open for interpretation in this day and age of mediocrity. No, we stand on solid ground when we're studying the Dhamma. And that's why it is remarkable, the truths that we find in it. So this sutta is called a Sañcetanā Sutta, sometimes referred to as Catukka Sañcetanā Sutta. Discourse on the intentions. This comes from the numerical discourses, Anguttara Nikāya, Book of the Fours, Sutta number 171. So sometimes, the Polytext Society's version has divided this sutta into two. However, when you look at the Burmese, the Thai, or the Sinhalese or Sri Lankan versions of it, they're just combined into one. They, in a sense, open up to each other, unfold into each other. So in the beginning, we see Lord Buddha delineating karma, and then we see how its workings influence the development or the morphing of the personality view. So, yes. So I won't talk too much about the background of this. Earlier, I gave another talk, so I was mentioning it to some of you who were here earlier. We covered the Kalama Sutta today, which was almost 3 hours long. So, but anyhow, so today's is Catukka Sañcetanā Sutta, Discourse on Intentions. Section 1. Bhikkhus, because of the lack in mindfulness as it regards to intentions, while using the body, pleasant and painful feelings arise and are experienced for oneself internally. Because of the lack in mindfulness as it regards to intentions while using speech, pleasant and painful feelings arise and are experienced for oneself internally. Because of the lack in mindfulness as it regards to intentions while thinking, pleasant and painful feelings arise and are experienced for oneself internally. All this occurs due to ignorance as their condition. We see again and again where people approach the Buddha asking linear questions. And what I mean by linear, it's, because of A, there's B, because of B, there's C type of, 1, 2, 3 type of linear. And to this day, we have that. People approaching and wanting to ask questions. We don't realize often, we don't pay enough attention to the fact that this is all about conditionality. The Dhamma is all about conditionality. Things arise because of causes. But the human brain likes to think in terms of, well, what singular caused this singular to take place? And again, Lord Buddha always pulls the person back and says, in different ways, the question itself is wrongly constructed. So here, for example, we see how pleasant and painful experiences occur. Nothing is mentioned about the outside world at this point in the paragraph. But the typical person, the Putujjana, will point the finger out to the world, outwards towards the world. The you, the other, a God, situations, the world, etc., for one's own, usually painful experiences, as well as pleasant ones. But hardly do we stop to question. And that stopping to ask the question can also be a definition for the lack in mindfulness, sati. It's so important that Lord Buddha placed sati in so many different formulas. Sometimes we think that it's just mindfulness. It's something, not as significant. However, it is the core. And as we go on in this throughout the sutta, we'll see how intentions have everything to do. The discovery of the intentions, the true character of the intention is only discovered if there is sati, and that's what we see here, are experienced for oneself internally. Bhikkhus, one either performs intentional actions with the body on one's own, and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally, or performs intentional actions with the body prompted by the intentions of others, and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally. Lord Buddha is not saying that we live in a vacuum. When someone comes and slaps you, yes, that was another person, an entity, who inflicted a certain sensation upon you, a painful experience upon you. Yes, that can happen. When a mother picks up a child who's crying, let's say, and tries to soothe the baby, let's say, starts to calm down, feels good, even starts laughing. That is an external person giving a pleasurable, non-painful experience to the person. But again, we like to look at things in subject-object relationship in a very singular fashion. When you look at the Paticcasamuppada, you're looking at not just one cause. Many times people still, even scholarly type people, will look at each of these links in a linear fashion as one compartment, then followed by another compartment. So if you were to draw it in a 3D form, it will look like a train, links of a chain, one link after another. So it's very singular, compartmentalized. But that's not Paticcasamuppada. That's still the brain, in fact, the left brain, trying to look at parts I was mentioning today how so long as we function only with the left brain dominance, meaning looking at the parts, guess what? You will never attain Nibbana. Impossible. Because the left brain will never understand the relationship among the parts. It does a wonderful job in understanding each of the parts. But trying to look at it in 3D space or 4D space, guess what? It's at a loss. So what does the brain do? It tries to use linear language. Object, subject, object, subject. In the Bhumija Sutta, we see how Venerable Sariputta, in answer to Venerable Bhumija, says, how Lord Buddha talks about the dependently arising nature of phenomena. This includes pleasure and pain. It's never you stubbing your toe, and that's the reason because you had painful experience. There's a whole slew of things involved. Was the light on? Were you paying attention? Stubbing of the toe against the hard surface, yes, that's part of it. Those are some of the conditions, but they are not the whole conditions, the whole set. In fact, when you look at it, there's no way that we can list all of the conditions. All of the conditions. That's why it's frustrating for students or individuals who have questions to come in. We, by nature, as human beings, we want to get an answer. And this can frustrate a person because it might, on the surface, look like you're giving them the runaround, but it's not so. The brain is very lazy. It likes to get simple, very, again, compartmentalized answers, one after that, after that, after that. That's how a child, an infant, works. The brain. And that's one of the reasons why we need to understand the relationships among different phenomena that take place. That's why the Dhamma is so deep. Many people just list the links of the 12 the causes of relation, steps of the Paticcasamuppada, and think that they got it. Understanding the link, the connection between them, that's it. But you bring them back to life and ask them, invite them to look at that formula playing out in front of them in their own interactions in relation to life. They're clueless. So they see or understand intellectually, conceptually, devoid of life. And that's why they consistently fail in seeing or connecting the meditative practice with the realization and forgetting the fact that this is a wisdom path. It needs to be applied. Otherwise, it's just junk. I was mentioning today about collecting data and knowledge. You cannot think of knowledge as being of value on its own. Knowledge is nothing if it is not applicable enough so that it can grant the person depth of understanding one's own relationship to life, to circumstances, to conditions. And for that, Lord Buddha highlights the role of contact, phassa, phassa. Putto bhikkave, Lord Buddha says, vedeti. Putto sanjanati. Putto ceteti. Through contact, bhikkhus, he says, one feels. Through contact, one perceives, sanjanati. Through contact, one intends, ceteti, cetana, ceteti. Through contact. And that is the thing which we forget to consider. So it's all dependent on contact. This is what Sat.
I think his Wi-Fi is not as strong.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I lost you there for a second, and you lost me. Anicca, dependently arisen contact. Yes, see, the Dhamma is playing out in front of our noses. Yes, we must laugh at all these things because, another thing that we forget to consider is we're living in Mara's world. Your body belongs to Mara. I was telling to a student the other day. Your eyes belong to Mara. Whatever your eyes, your ears hear and see and touch, your body, all of it belongs to Mara. We have it simply on loan. We're borrowing it from Mara. And for you to be able to come across the Dhamma and actually penetrate and see what's really going on, that is quite amazing. So let us continue before we get interrupted again. All right. So also, one either performs those intentional bodily actions with clear understanding and as a result, experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally, or performs intentional bodily actions without clear understanding and as a result, experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally. Internally means that it is obviously being felt by the person. So whether there is something instigating it or not from the outside world is irrelevant. But the person nevertheless is feeling it. Nevertheless, they're feeling it. Bhikkhus, one either performs intentional actions through speech on one's own and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally, or performs intentional actions through speech prompted by the intentions of others, and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally. We need to remember that kamma becomes kamma because of intentions. Because of intentions. Intentions are the backbone of kamma, or karma itself is action. But in order for it to have the weight of how we understand karma being, meaning like vipaka, or the result of karma, it needs to be impregnated, if you will, prompted, if you will, by intention. So we repeat this. After you repeat this enough times, you understand, okay, so intention is a big deal. In order for kamma to work as kamma, fine. But what do we do? Do we probe it even deeper? Do we look at, earlier, Lord Buddha was saying, in the absence of mindfulness, but the person continues to do those actions. That doesn't mean that those actions are not kamma. Many people are routinely engaged in doing actions that have a momentum behind them. Momentum that is prompted by none other than wrong view. So wrong view is playing its part. It is like the undercurrent. It's like the ground. It's the stream that's flowing underneath, whether the person is aware of it or not, or they are intending to do it. And that's what Lord Buddha called anusayas, or latent or dormant, hidden tendencies. So simply because the person is not loudly, shall we say, intending as such to do something, it doesn't have to be so loud. It is something that nevertheless routinely is being picked up, chosen by the individual to be engaged in. And here we have the example of speech Lord Buddha talks about. Well, speech is also, in this case, we can look at it as a sankhara, the habitual tendency, or formation sometimes are translated. Because what is speech? When you look at, before it turns into speech, it's vitakka vichara. That is the verbal sankhara in the mind. And that's why we call it subvocal speech. Before it is released, it needs to be prepared, like Bhante Candana says. That's why he calls sankharas preparations, because first it has to be groomed, it has to be gestated, it has to be prepared and fermented in the brain in the form of thinking and pondering, planning. I like to call vichara as planning. And then it is released from the lips. So it could be prompted by someone else. Meanwhile, the person neglectfully is engaged in it. Neglectful in regards to sati, because they're routinely doing the same old. For that reason, we need to have the proper attention, radical attention, wise attention, yoniso manasikara, all the time, which is brought forth with the absolute necessity in the presence of, rather, of sati. Because without sati, forget it, yoniso manasikara cannot take place. So in essence, what we're talking about are karmic blind spots, if you will. Actions committed routinely in the absence of sati, you can call them karmic blind spots. If you've ever driven a car or you're walking and you're completely careless as to who's next to you and you're turning your direction, going to the left and ignoring the person next to you, you're going to slam into them. That's a blind spot. You didn't see. Or you're even cognizant, but there's somebody who's running fast. There's no way that you're going to catch that. You don't have rear view mirror, let's say. That's also a karmic blind spot. But nevertheless, we have to be extremely cautious, and that cautious attitude comes in the form of sati and sampajanya, that alertness of oneself in time and space, starting with the body as you move in time and space. Before you release the words out of your mouth, check. What was the nature of this internal monologue again? What was I saying to myself? And suddenly blurted out what actually created a debacle for me and everyone else. Made a fool of myself, an embarrassment to everyone involved. What was that? That was not necessarily a loud intention. So we need to have that conscious awareness. Otherwise, these anusayas are working under the radar, if you will, not to be detected so long as there's no sati. If there's sati, sati will sniff them out. Sati, in that sense, you can think of it as a hound dog, as, you know, there's no way you're going to be able to slip in front of it without it detecting. So sati has to be there if we need to pay some attention to what we call intention. Because intention can be subtle, like in the form of anusayas, or it could be loud. Usually, as human beings, we only recognize intention in the form of it being chosen, with conscious awareness, etc. But most of the action is actually being done by the anusayas, the hidden tendencies. I have included here another segment from Samyutta Nikaya's connected discourses, Cetana Sutta, which is from Samyutta Nikāya 12.38. In it, we see how Lord Buddha says, monks, what one intends, what one mentally constructs, whatever lies latent, hidden, in him, that becomes an object for the stationing of consciousness. Lands. It's like the dust that settles on the table. That sets the scene for consciousness to arise. There being an object, there comes to be an establishment of consciousness. When that consciousness is established and has come to growth, there is the production of future renewed existence. So it's like the substrate, mental substrate that is being, or you could use even the word mental basis or object. In Pali, the term is arammana. Arammana. So anything that one gets attached to, including Dhamma, including principles, concepts, things that we say, this will take me to arahantship. That itself, when undetected as to one's relationship to it, could very well be an arammana, a substrate, a table for the ignorance to land on, if you will. Also, excuse me, one either performs those intentional verbal actions with clear understanding and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally, or performs intentional verbal actions without clear understanding and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally. One either performs intentional actions through thought on one's own and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally, or performs intentional actions through thought prompted by the intentions of others and as a result experience their pleasant and painful feelings internally. We see this all the time, where someone else's words, including their thoughts, could affect our well-being, our thoughts, our well-being get affected, whether we know it or not. Oftentimes, we never look at advertisements, commercials. Well, every single board meeting where advertisers come together to promote a product, there's definitely a group of psychologists working with them, or right there with them at the board meeting, how to manipulate the human brain. Every single research that's ever been done in the scientific arena, human beings during the last 100 and 150 years have worked day and night to monetize it, to weaponize it. There's a wonderful documentary I watched at one point. It's from the 1970s, I think 1977 or 79 or 73. It is entitled The Century of the Self. Century of the Self. And I highly recommend it. For some reason, it's still out there on YouTube. So I highly recommend it. It's about 3 hours long, but it has, it's been segmented so you can watch it in portions. But it shows us and it teaches us how manipulation tactics have been underway for over 100 years. How to manipulate the thoughts and hence the feelings of individuals, the emotions, whereabouts we've actually even come to accept them. If you ever gone to any kind of a meeting or training for salesmanship and how to sell products, they always teach you, you must first inculcate a sense of urgency, an emotional need. They even know the role of Samvega, apparently, while we don't. Day and night, get on a loudspeaker to tell bhikkhus and upasakas and upasikas to develop that urgency. But commercials and advertising agencies have been doing it for so long. So yes, their thoughts definitely affect our thoughts. That's why you cannot sleep at night until you find the money to go and get that thing which you do not need. But now you want because they have convinced you that in fact you do need it. And in fact, everyone else in your family needs it. Otherwise, there's no safety. They are breaking, destroying the Four Noble Truths. Mara. Again, we're living in Mara land. Let's not forget that. Because these fluctuating states are influenced by ignorance, but with the cessation and complete eradication of ignorance, there is no more a body that is conditioned by or susceptible to experiencing pleasant or painful feelings internally. So now we're seeing the opposite. What is it that Lord Buddha is trying to get us to move towards? Noble disciple who has destroyed the ignorance. Remember, ignorance, the simplest way of understanding ignorance is the absence of sati. Simplest way. Ignorance doesn't mean not having, the understanding of paticca-samuppada. Forget about that. No, that's not applicable. That's not relatable. Sati, let's start with that. That's doable. We can bring sati in. And the more you do, the more it stays with you, the more you start to unravel. Even a very, very dim light, a battery that is barely, struggling to pour out some energy in a flashlight. If you really, really take it into a dark, pitch black room, even that faint, faint light can actually serve a purpose. You would be able to see shapes. Case in point, when you walk into a dark room from a light environment, lit up environment, initially there's pitch blackness. Your eyes need to adjust. But guess what? Your eyes will dilate and you will start to suddenly see shapes and find your way around. Same thing. That indicates there's wisdom developing. But as to where it leads to the person no longer being conditioned, being subject to experiencing pleasure and pain. Also, there is no more speech that is conditioned by or susceptible to experiencing pleasant or painful feelings internally, meaning you will stub your toe. The conditions are there. So long as you have a body, yes, it's dependently arisen. You're not made of plastic. If there's a pinch, there's going to be an ouch. Okay. But does the person dwell on those experiences? Yeah, they feel the pain, absolutely. And they also feel the pleasure. If it's extremely, extremely hot outside and suddenly they see this cool body of water and they jump in, the body cools and they go, just like you and me. But it does not shake them. The mind doesn't get agitated by the pleasurable or the painful experience. In other words, they do not find themselves victims of sankhara. That's why they don't make papanchas. There's no papanchas. So these are systematically taking place, phase by phase. They're unfolding. Again, starting from sati, which is going to shed the light on whether the intention behind this action, whether anusaya or really extremely, noticeable intention, is it kusala or akusala? Dveda Vitakka Sutta. Two kinds of thoughts where you're actually having two piles of action, of thought, mental action, verbal action, or physical action, where Lord Buddha picked the one that was wholesome. But because it's clear in your mind, because sati is there all the time, even when you wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, there's stillness in the mind. You're seeing the very first thoughts that come in, pop into the horizon of your conscious awareness. You don't follow that. You're observant. While you're also observant to walk through the dark, to go to the bathroom. Also, there is no more a mind that is conditioned by or susceptible to experiencing pleasant or painful feelings internally. In this case, we can think of it as the sankharas or the mental sankharas, meaning feeling and perception. The field on account of which pleasant and unpleasant feelings arise internally no longer exists. The object on account of which internal pleasant and unpleasant feelings arise internally no longer exists. So in essence, there's no more table, there's no more dust to see. The atmosphere on account of which internal pleasant and unpleasant feelings arise internally no longer exist. Did you notice there's internally being repeated? We're talking about the, excuse me, the mental state, the inner state. The well-being, the mind is unagitated, basically. The mind is unagitated. And the easiest way to think of a mind that is unagitated is when we come across the term viraga, a dispassion. And in this case, we can also bring in the other definition of viraga, which is fading away. Fading away. You're no longer pulled and pushed in a tug of war of running away from the unpleasant, from the unpleasant or painful experiences towards the preferential atmosphere or state or object or sphere, which we call the pleasurable or the pleasant. You see all these tricks that the mind, the pendulum movement, in other words. The state of affairs on account of which internal pleasant and unpleasant feelings arise internally no longer exists. When there is the bodily sankharas, pleasure and pain will exist internally. When there is speech, because of verbal sankharas, vitakka and vichara, thinking and planning or pondering, pleasure and pain will exist. And that's one of the reasons why Lord Buddha emphasized the role of noble silence, not just on a retreat, but in your mind. Many of us want to go on retreats here and there, once a year or once a month or etc. But the key thing to remember is, can you get on a retreat while you're in your room, while you're sitting in your on your desk, in front of your desk, at your work? The way to do that is by observing the verbal sankharas, meaning the chit-chat that's going on in the brain, in the mind. When there is the mind, because of mental sankharas, mental, mano sankharas, feelings oftentimes that are carried through from the past, meaning 5 minutes ago. You might have seen your ex-girlfriend or ex-partner or a neighbor that has been extremely annoying or threatening, whom you haven't seen for a long time, and now suddenly you've seen them, and now you come back to your own place of refuge, but you are not in your place of refuge anymore. You don't have a sense of safety because you are dislodged. You are worried. The mental sankharas they're going berserk. There's perceptions playing, memories playing, possibilities playing, mental associations. Papancha is also playing. And there are the feelings both from the past, triggered by seeing of this person, which is now playing on the screen of your mind, perceptions. And as a result of these interactions, guess what? You're having feelings in regards to the future. So you're in a trap. There's no refuge for the person. All this is going on in the absence of sati. So how can sati then be looked down upon as not so significant of a factor in our progress? It is the very first door through which we must walk. We cannot even tread upon the Eightfold Path without sati being there to show us whether we are doing the patipada, we're actually in the training or not. So in essence, we constantly are generating and entertaining sankharas. We give them water. We give them water, and there's plenty of seeds of sankharas, thanks to limitless, countless births and rebirths, and the momentum that has been created in the past, thanks to our actions, usually, majority of the time, being akusala actions, badly chosen, bad intentional actions. So what that does then is it creates a vortex, a powerful vortex, the sankharas. And we suddenly find ourselves in situations and the mental tendencies are coming in, and someone says something, guess what? We're irritated. We see something, we're irritated. The very first thing that happens is the breathing changes. I used to really enjoy pointing this out to patients in sessions. When I would say something and they would go, or the breath changes, the pattern changes, it becomes shallow, or they stop breathing. I immediately stop what I'm saying and point at that. And it would take some a few milliseconds at least for the person to say, what do you mean? What was that? That's my question. What was that? Did you notice that? Or I would just come out and say, you can start breathing now. And then they catch themselves. And say, yeah, why did I stop breathing? So we unravel that. We try to understand. So that becomes the link for the person to develop an understanding of intentional action, meaning they are the contributors to their own suffering. That's like the back door, in a sense, where the person now sees, okay, I'm not fast enough to detect my negative tendencies of thinking, etc., or the negative things I say to myself. But I know definitely now what to look for that's a little bit more tangible, meaning the breath. And as they grab hold of that thin, very slender thread, as they walk through the jungle to retrace their steps as to what's causing it, slowly, slowly, the thread becomes thicker, more noticeable. And specifically in the case of Vachi Sankhara, or the verbal Sankharas, meaning Vitakka Vichara, thinking and planning or pondering, what we normally are preparing to say the moment the words are unleashed through the mouth. Or maybe it doesn't have to be the mouth, it could be an email or a text. So there's a lot going on. That's what we're seeing here in the sutta being pointed at by Lord Buddha. It's not just somebody instigating something, poking you, trying to get a rise out of you. It's not that. Yeah, sometimes it happens. He said it in the beginning, but it's more than that. There's a lot going on inside of us. That only what's required is a tiny little feather that breaks the camel's back. But it's much more, well, it's easier to look at the world and see an actual entity standing across from you, looking mean, and you turn to them and say, because of you, I'm not feeling safe. You ruined my day. That guy who flipped me off on the LA traffic in the freeway, that guy was the person who actually ruined my day. So I'm no longer happy. That's simplistic. That's what we see here. So now we get to the section 2 of the sutta, where we get more of an analysis or a classification of the intention itself. So in the beginning section, we saw how they are related to the 3 doors: the mind, the speech, verbal, and the body. In this section, we see how Kamma matures and unfolds, or not unfolds, but morphs into the sense of personality. Gets the person to say, this is my. Yes, I lost you there for 15 seconds, maybe less. Well, it's recording, so. Okay, so apologies for this. It's just, this is the best place I have a reception. The other office that I was using was far worse, I discovered. And it seems to be okay, minus these incidents. All right, so I was saying how the concept of selfhood, or through actions, intentionally, whether knowingly or unknowingly, like anusayas, we can call it unknowingly, but they're there, routinely done actions. In the absence of sati, they're there. There's intention there. So what we have here is the term personality taking shape. So let's go on for this. Bhikkhus, these are the 4 types of taking rebirth. What for? Bhikkhus, there is rebirth that is led by one's own intention and not those of others. There is rebirth that is led by the intention of others and not of one's own. There is rebirth that is led by both one's own intention and those of others. And there is rebirth that is neither led by one's own intention nor those of others. These are the 4 types of taking rebirth. Again, contact is huge. Conditioned by contact, rebirth takes place. Without it, we cannot experience anything, let alone rebirth. Some people might get into like metaphysics into this, like reading into that statement. And but I want to go forward with the sutta here. When this was said, Venerable Sariputta said this to the Blessed One: Bhante, I understand the detailed meaning of this short exposition given by the Blessed One to be as follows. The rebirth that is led by one's own intention and not those of others refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence into another through their own intention. The rebirth that is led by the intentions of others and not those of oneself refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence into another through the intention of others. The rebirth that is led by both one's own intention and those of others refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence into another through the intentions of both, those of themselves as well as those of others. But, Bhante, in the case of rebirth that is neither led by one's own intention nor those of others, what category of devas might the Blessed One be referring to here? This refers to those devas existing in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. I want to come back to what Venerable Sariputta was saying. The rebirth that is led by one's own intention and not those of others refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence into another through their own intention. Now, this does not necessarily mean only a person who has the necessary merits and the ability to go into jhanas, to be reborn, let's say, into the Brahma realms at the moment of that. Yes, that category of beings are included in this, but it could also be something a lot more mundane. A person who commits suicide, a person who is in misery, a person who wants to bring misery into other people's lives. That's also a person. Of course, it's like the opposite on the spectrum of what I gave the example of, a deva or, Brahma God. So that could be one way of interpreting that sentence. The rebirth that is led by the intentions of others and not those of oneself refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence to another through the intention of others. This is when a person is, let's say, being killed. The intention is manifesting in the form of action, where somebody is taking the life of another person. That is one way of understanding that's the sentence. There could be other interpretations of that, of course. The rebirth that is led by both one's own intention and those of others refers to those beings who pass away from their realm of existence into another through the intentions of both, those of themselves as well as those of others. So that doesn't mean that into the same realm. So let's say somebody who is trying to kill someone, they have an intention to end this person's life. Okay, that's one intention. The other intention is that person's intention. Where are they? Is the mind agitated? Even though the person who's killing them has a very agitated mind. So the way I understand this sentence is, it does not have to be the same destination, if you will, of rebirth, but nevertheless a rebirth nonetheless. So one wants to end this person's life here. Meanwhile, this person chooses to intend to get a higher rebirth by, for example, thinking of, like that executioner whose example came up today in one of the questions I was trying to answer, who had killed so many people as his job for the king. And he had called Venerable Sariputta, requested his presence at the moment of his death. And Venerable Sariputta comes and says, when you were killing these people, cutting their heads, decapitating them, did you have any hatred in your heart towards them? He says, no. Did you really enjoy killing them? He thinks and he says, no, not really. Did you have any anger towards them? He says, no. I was just doing my job. The king commanded me to, and I did. He says, Meanwhile, the man was worried up to that point because he knew that he had taken people's lives. He knew that. These were people that were other people's fathers, brothers, I don't know. And he deprived them of them. So he knew, so his heart was heavy, his mind was agitated. So Venerable Sariputta brought him back to a memory that he had of offering the most tastiest, delicious rice bowl, food, biryani or whatever it was, to Venerable Sariputta when he had come to Pindapada. Because that day, he was about to eat that meal, and then he said, I have never done anything good in my life. And he had just been retired, by the way, from his post as the king's executioner. So he said, let me just do one good thing in my life. And he goes and pours that rice, that delicious rice, into Venerable Sariputta's bowl. And he feels amazing. He's so joyful. That's what Venerable Sariputta brings him back to. Once he settled his mind by saying, did you have any hatred? Did this and this? And he says, no. And then he brought a joyful, uplifting sensation into the mind. The man just rested and became relaxed. He felt, he understood, he had the good intention now. So this is another way of understanding, where Venerable Sariputta assisted him to inculcate a sense of, or intention that allowed him to be reborn in a heavenly realm. Of course, that opens up a can of, Pandora's box with some people. It's like, come on, Bhante, he was an executioner. How could he be? In fact, people did go to Lord Buddha complaining once they found out that Lord Buddha said, well, he's not in hell, because people wanted to come and get a confirmation from Lord Buddha. And he said, no, he's not in hell, he's in heaven, in some heavenly realm. Their jaws dropped. It's like, are you kidding? How could he? That's unfair. But they didn't see the whole picture. Most people, when they think of a Deva realm, they're thinking that's the end, because that, it's a Disney-esque way of thinking. Oh, yes, he's in heaven, she's in heaven, that's it, you're good to go forever. There's no such thing. The credit's going to run out, And my hope has always been to, hope that these individuals, when they are reborn there, that encounter with such a great arahant would instigate them to keep probing and trying to understand, meaning carrying the Dhamma with their heart into that realm, where they start looking for the Dhamma, enough so that there's enough sangvega, enough so that they could become, at the very least, a sotapanna. So that is my hope. Unfortunately, I haven't come across any statement about that executioner or ex-executioner as to what happened. Probably, hopefully he's in some Deva realm. Maybe he's listening to this talk. I don't know. Hopefully he is. Okay, so, excuse me. So he's saying those devas refer to, this is the last type of devas, rebirth, neither perception nor non-perception. Bhante, what is the reason why some beings who pass away from that realm of neither perception nor non-perception only end up coming back to this realm of existence, whereas others immediately become non-returners and thus never come back to this realm? Interesting. Non-returners. Now we have anagamis in the picture. And then we're going to see Lord Buddha's response. Here, Sariputta, consider someone who has not yet abandoned the 5 lower fetters. While living in this realm, they develop the mind to the point where it can experience and dwell in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. This is an anagami because they have relinquished the 5 lower fetters. So when we hear that, immediately Lord Buddha is referring to an anagami. But he says they're experiencing and dwelling in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, the 8th jhana, which they find enjoyable and are satisfied by and not go beyond it. They enjoy it. It's a restful station. If they thus continue abiding in it and do not lose it, at the moment of death, in this existence, they are reborn in the company of the devas of the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. However, as his time runs out eventually from living in that realm, we're talking about, I think, about 84,000 Mahakalpas. If you write that down in 12 font, the numbers, I think it's several miles long, just in 12 font. The numbers, 84,000 Mahakalpas, as to how many Earth years, our years, that could be equivalent of. So eventually, when he passes away there, the person is reborn by returning back to this realm of existence. But consider someone else who has indeed abandoned the 5 lower fetters. Oh, I'm sorry. That's why I was like, wait a minute. What, am I reading it wrong? I translated this, by the way, so nobody else's fault, mine only. But no, it's in that paragraph I just read. Actually, I misspoke. Here, Sariputta considers someone who has not yet abandoned the 5 lower fetters. I read who has abandoned, so my bad. So for the reason that this person has not abandoned the 5 lower fetters, meaning the person might be, let's say, a Sotapanna in this case, or even a Sakadagami. For that reason, the person will come back to this realm of existence. Notice he doesn't say we'll go to a lower realm. So when, chances are that they would if they were not Sotapannas. But consider someone else who has indeed abandoned the 5 lower fetters. While living in this realm, they develop the mind to the point where it can experience and dwell in the realm of neither perception nor non-perception, which they find enjoyable and are satisfied by and not go beyond it. When we hear the words not go beyond it, that means that this person is not practicing the cessation of perception and feeling. Okay? Which is the jhanic state that only a Buddha can discover, can teach. Because let's not forget, the 8 jhanas were there at the time of Siddhartha Gautama, his own teacher's son, actually. He hadn't attained it. First, Siddhartha Gautama attains it, and then he goes off and is like, no, this is not it. There's got to be deeper, because I still feel the kileshas, the defilements are there. But his teacher, Uddaka Ramaputta, Rama's son, then he is able to actually enter into the neither perception nor non-perception. So it was available. What was not available was Sanya Vedaita Nirodha Samapatti, the cessation of perception and feeling state. So that is the deviation. We can call it a deviation. Either go to the 8 jhana of neither perception or non-perception, or you can actually jump that and go towards the cessation, which can give the anagami. Not every anagami experiences this. Visakha, for example, or Chitta, they didn't experience that because they would go into cessation of feeling and perception. But certain anagamis would go into the cessation of perception and feeling, and as they come out, either attain to the fruition stage of anagami stage, non-returner, or in many cases, in the case of the bhikkhus especially, they go into arahantship. The neither perception nor non-perception will never give you that. Never. Because it was always there. Even at the time of, in the dark ages where there's no Dhamma. You can still find that. As the case was with Uddaka Ramaputta. But here in this case, not go beyond it. That's how I understand it anyhow. Some others might disagree. So not go beyond it. In this case, I'm understanding it as they don't go into the cessation of perception and feeling. They really get cozied up in the neither perception nor non-perception. I met some people who like to stay in the neither perception nor non-perception. It's like, why? There's no wisdom there. So what? You get to relax a little bit. Is that why you're practicing the Dhamma? Really? And then Lord Buddha continues, if they thus continue abiding in it and do not lose it, at the moment of death in this existence, they are reborn in the company of the devas of the realm of neither perception nor non-perception. When his time runs out eventually from living in that realm, and when he passes away there, this person becomes a non-returner, never to return back to this realm of existence, because the 5 lower fetters have been dropped for the person. Even to their surprise, they will land in the pure abodes. There's several of those. One of them, even the lowest, is not a bad deal. It's like pure abode. There's only one way out, arahantship. And Lord Buddha continues, this is the reason why some beings who pass away from that realm of neither perception nor non-perception only end up coming back to this realm of existence, whereas others immediately become non-returners and thus never come back to this realm. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. An interesting sutta, as you can see. And I try to pick suttas that are not that often explored, or even the ones that have been, I try to look at it from a different angle and see if we can shed some light and see something there, some gems that we haven't noticed, and possibly open up an interesting dialogue and exploration, especially for the benefit of not arguing, not debating, not to develop more so-called knowledge, which I term today as undigested food. And what happens to undigested food in your gut? It turns toxic. It poisons you. And that's what we have a lot of today. People collecting, hoarding teachers, teachings in the world. I was joking last week when I said about many people are today considering the Dhamma, virtual Dhamma Zoom communities or communities, not so differently than a 12-step program. AA meetings that a person who's suffering from some type of an addiction, they stop the addiction, but they develop a new addiction, which is participating in several different groups per day. And that gives them joy, that gives them, but it is an addiction nevertheless. They're still afraid to stand on their own 2 feet. So when we're exploring the suttas, I'm always trying to see if we can encourage individuals to not be a hoarder of Dhamma, principles, concepts, teachings, this, that. Lord Buddha says in the Dhammapada, even a little bit of the teachings, the scriptures, if you just know that, stick to that. Venerable Moggallana used a very simple sentence that Lord Buddha gave him. If you remember from last year, I think, when we did the Pachalayamana Sutta, where he asked Lord Buddha during the week of struggle that he had before becoming an arahant. He says, Bhante, is there a concise, brief little teaching that you could give me that could enable me to attain the highest fruits of this Dhamma and discipline? And Lord Buddha says, yes. I thought you would never ask. I just added that part. He says, Sabbe Dhamma nalang abhinivesaya. Nothing, no conditioned thing is worth clinging to. And that was enough for him. That was all the Dhamma that Venerable Moggallana needed. And he broke through his ignorance. He didn't know the suttas. You definitely know more suttas than Venerable Moggallana did, which is quite amazing. But we don't need to know that much. Let's try to apply. For example, in this sutta, okay, Cetana. We can struggle. We can find out, though, what my intention is behind this action. Okay. Once you do get a handle of that, on that, then the next task would be to look for the hidden intentions, meaning the routinely committed actions that nevertheless perpetuate the state of suffering for us. Meaning, why am I being tossed back and forth in this tug of war between pleasure and pain. Well, that's a telltale sign that there are anusayas, there are intentions, not good ones, behind it. So I will stop here. Excuse me. The weather, smoke. Are there any thoughts, comments, questions that
Bhante, I want to thank you for your talk today. I read through this sutta several times last night, and it didn't make sense to me. So I want to remind you how helpful you are when you do these lessons for us, because now I have a much better understanding of what the sutta is about and the lessons we're trying to learn. Without that, I'm lost without you. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Sadhu, sadhu. Sukhi hotu. May you be blessed by the Dhamma. And that curiosity that compels you to probe, may it take you straight to arahantship. All of you. And that is the purpose of these suttas, explorations, whatever you might call it. Life is short, and every moment matters. And I don't consider those attempts of reading and rereading on your part of the sutta last night, let's say, today, as futile. They were necessary. You know, I see sometimes, or back in Lebanon, when I was in the monastery, Christian monastery, when I was a teenager, sometimes we had to go into the field and use the hoe to break open the solid ground. Sometimes the soil would have been dry for some reason. Sometimes, even though you hit it, the hoe doesn't go deep, or whatever. Maybe I'm not even saying it right, the tool. But anyhow, you have to go again and again and get the shovel in, really go deep. But the first strike was not futile, was not unnecessary. It was, because it's piercing through. And sometimes I come across suttas where I go, okay, this is it. That's a full stop. That end for me. That's it. I can't, there's no way I can understand this. This is beyond anything. And then we must develop some compassion and forgiveness of ourselves and try it again, understand it, and just take one snippet of it and take it with you on a ride with you throughout the day, and see if you can find something where it can land. And just because one of the 5 ways of becoming awakened is actually playing it in your head, repeating it, mentally chewing on it, internally processing it, with the pure intention of understanding. What does Lord Buddha is trying to say? What is he trying to say? What does he say with this? And it must be relevant to your life. That's the beauty of the Dhamma. Nothing in the Dhamma is irrelevant to your life. Nothing. I've never come across a single teaching that is irrelevant to your life, having to be weaved into the DNA of your life, which is amazing. I've never encountered anything like that in any other teaching. And that's why I can't pick up any book. I used to have libraries of different books, different philosophies, different schools of Buddhism, even teachers, etc. I can't touch it. I can't touch them. I can't, because they're irrelevant. Because once we dive into the suttas, and then you come across, of course, those suttas that do not belong. Somebody injected them in. And that you will know, because it does not speak to you. It's very heady. It's like, that is futile. And that is probably Abhidhamma people squeezing it in edgewise to kind of validate. Because you do have quite a number of suttas like that. in every single Nikāya almost. So go with your gut feeling of I guess that's what I'm trying to say, and not to doubt that inner goodness in you. Because even the attempt of exploring pure intentionally, does wonders for you. It might not give you the immediate result that you want. That's okay, but it's like the first cracking of the hard surface soil. Soon enough, if you keep working on it, all of a sudden you see this delicious looking reddish brown soil appear from underneath, fertile. The soil that has been rested for a long time, ready to take in whatever seeds you give it, and boom, it sprouts. I don't know where that came from, so I hope it was helpful. Any other thoughts before we transfer some merits?
Yes, when we get to the section, in the second section, seen this light for me, you were talking about the different combinations of intention that leading to rebirth. The last one they spoke about it relating to neither perception nor non-perception. Does that imply that there's different levels of jhana or rebirth realms that those other combinations relate to? Because I can't look at that and tell.
You mean the other three rebirths that are mentioned, are they pertaining to the jhanas, you mean?
Well, or to different realms, whether it's a realm of rebirth or to a realm of jhana, I don't know.
Yeah.
So yes, that's the question.
They don't necessarily have to do, usually from what I'm reading, they don't necessarily have to be talking about a jhanic state equivalent, like the Brahma states, the Brahma realms, Brahma Viharas. That's why we call them Brahma Viharas, because they are beyond the Kama Loka, meaning the sensual realm, because there's several realms above the human realm where the Kama Loka still spreads out into. Our realm, the human realm, is Kama Loka, part of Kama Loka. Animals, the same thing, because they know pleasure. That's why when you touch your cat, it purrs. It knows very well what it means to be, experiencing pleasure. Well, the devas, there's several deva realms above us that still function on those. That is not what we think of when we say a jhanic rebirth, meaning when we're talking about the jhana, we're talking about the Brahma realms, like when the person is able to maintain the jhana, especially because emphasis on maintain, because there are some suttas where Lord Buddha, we see some bhikkhus. There's one elder bhikkhu who used to go in and out of jhanas when he was younger. And he goes and he's now perplexed. He's now kind of worried because he's like, did I lose it? Bhante, did I lose it? Because I can't get into the jhana anymore. And Lord Buddha's question is very simple, and he goes into the wisdom factor. He says, how is your understanding of the Four Noble Truths, three characteristics of existence? Because sometimes some of us will not be able to maintain that going in and out of jhanas or staying in a jhana X amount of time, even if you were able to do in the past, some of us. But that doesn't mean that the attainment of wisdom, if it has occurred, that also has gone out the door. Sometimes I've noticed that in individuals who are unable to go into the jhana for whatever reason. So bearing that in mind, so coming back to your question directly, here in these three examples, in this paragraph, you pointed out, the person can also end up in hell. Like I said about the miserable person committing suicide, in depression, or killing others and then killing oneself. So that doesn't involve any jhanic state. So we don't necessarily have to look at these three forms, or in this case, four, including neither perception nor non-perception, as specifically for jhanic rebirth. But they can be, like in the example of being reborn in the Brahma Loka. But definitely in the case of the fourth example, whether the person ends up in a neither perception realm and then comes back to earth, the human realm, or ends up in the neither perception nor non-perception and then goes into the pure abodes. Those two definitely have to have had a jhana experienced for the person, and specifically the eighth jhana has to have happened. Now, prior to the person, let's say, if we remove the neither perception nor non-perception out, remove it out of the equation and just look at the person, in this case, having relinquished the 5 lower fetters, the question might come up, well, Bhante, or, teacher, does this person then has to have had jhanas to get to becoming an anagami? No. It helps to experience the jhanas because the level of equanimity has matured in the mind of the person. It helps, but we don't know for sure. But the person might have had enough work done in the past whereby they just listen to one single Dhamma talk or a portion of it, and they become anagami. They go through all the 3 stages. Venerable Bahya, he went through all 4 stages without going into a single jhana, for example. Not a single jhana is mentioned. Now, he might have experienced jhanas in his previous birth when he was on the rock. If you remember, once we were talking about, he was one of the 7 monks on the rock, the 5 of whom didn't make it as in they died. The other 2, one of them became an arahant, the other one became an anagami. So he was one of the 5. So we don't know. No one says anything. There's no record in the commentary. I have never seen it where they have specifically laid out, oh yes, he experienced this jhana. We don't know. But as far as the attainments go, he went through all the 4 in that rebirth, in his last rebirth. Sotapatti, Sakadagami, Anagami, and Arahant. Boom, 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 right after each other, without a jhana. And that's one of the reasons why I highly, highly encourage, when you're listening to a Dhamma talk or reading a sutta, don't pay so much attention to the speaker. Just let the Dhamma seep into the heart. Listen with your heart. Or how to do that. If you've ever had a beautiful moment, if you've ever listened to, let's say, Vivaldi or Bach, if you like Western classical music or something, beautiful sunset. Don't just see with your eyes. Same thing. So you're giving up your intellect, the analysis, and just trusting whatever's coming towards you. Nothing's going to happen. You're safe. When there's Dhamma, you're safe. See if you can give in and trust, including when you're having a difficulty understanding a sutta. That's my suggestion. So I hope I was able to somewhat answer your question. What do you think?
Thank you. Yes. I think so. I'm happy. Yes.
Okay. All right. I will stop because I will be leaving tomorrow morning on a trip for 5 days, and then so I'll be back next week. So well, we have it off next week. That every other week thing that we have now, it's temporary, by the way, because I'm overwhelmed. Because I do a new translation of a sutta and I cover it here while I'm here in Malaysia with students, and that's really taking its toll on my health and everything. So that's one of the reasons why I actually wanted to spread it out temporarily. Eventually, when I leave Malaysia at the end of next month, I wanted to come back to a weekly thing, frequency. So it's temporary, this arrangement. So let's transfer some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well, may you be safe. May you be unafraid and courageous. So long as the Dhamma is with you, there's nothing to fear. Remember, we're just borrowing the body, the eyes, even the brain, the world, our loved ones. They all belong to Mara. They're on loan. We have to give them back. But the Dhamma and what it does to you, that's off limits to Mara. Even when you get into a jhana, actually, Mara doesn't know what that experience is. It's off limits. So I'll stop here. Be well. Until next time.